Hey guys, Danny Garcia. Okay, so the assigned hazard that I was given was hydrological hazards, which are a few, but I was told to specifically consider flash flooding, and the audience to which I'm giving a presentation is citizens in an area prone to flash flooding. So I'll give this. I'll do the remainder of this video as I'm actually presenting to an auditorium full of citizens in an area prone. Okay, so floods. Let's first discuss floods. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, floods can happen during heavy rains, when oceans come onto shore, when snow melts too fast, or when dams or levees break. If you weren't already aware of this, floods are the most common and widespread of all weather-related disasters. They occur all across the world for all the reasons that I just gave. Flash floods are the most dangerous kinds of floods because they combine the destructive power of a flood with the incredible speed and unpredictability of water flowing. Flash floods occur when excessive water fills normally dry creeks or riverbeds, along with current flowing creeks and rivers, causing rapid rises of water in a short amount of time. They can happen with little or no warning. So if there are creeks or rivers in our neighborhood, in our area, and any one of the common causes of floods were to occur in this area, those river beds and dry creeks, or full creeks and full rivers, would be inundated with even more water, causing a rapidly moving wall of water, which is called flash flooding. They can happen, obviously, with little or no warning. It all depends. A flash flood is caused by heavy or excessive rainfall in a short period of time, generally less than 6 hours. So if we get a large amount of rain within 6 hours, and because our area is prone to flash flooding, we, of course, would experience flash flooding. Other areas that can experience flash flooding include areas that have been damaged by wildfires, because wildfires, obviously, they burn the vegetation, they scar the landscape. And this scarred landscape is called burn scars, and they are particularly susceptible to flash floods, which also flash flooding can have a debris flow associated with that flooding during rainstorms. Rainfall that is normally absorbed by that vegetation that would have been there prior to the fire can run off almost instantaneously, causing those creeks and drainage areas to flood much earlier and with higher magnitude than normal. According to weatherology.com, over our 30-year average, no other natural disaster takes more lives each year than flooding. During a typical rain shower, some of the water is soaked up by the land. The rest of it runs off into the rivers, lakes, and streams like we just discussed. If the rain becomes more intense and increases, a larger portion of that rainfall becomes runoff, is less able to be absorbed by the land. So this excessive runoff obviously is the danger that we're concerned about with flash flooding. So streams that were just trickles hours before become raging torrents in a matter of minutes, and it's the sum of all of these factors that I've just discussed that create a flash flood. So where do flash floods occur, and who does it affect? Obviously, it's affecting us. We live in a flood zone, and we are prone to flash floods, but let's discuss some of the other areas that are affected by flash floods. So again, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, densely populated areas are at high risk for flash floods. So we here in this area, we are highly densely populated. And what this means is that there will be a construction of buildings, highways, driveways, parking lots for any area that's densely populated like ours. And so what this does is it increases the runoff by reducing the amount of rain that could have been absorbed by natural vegetation and ground. And also, on top of not having the ability to be absorbed by the vegetation, we also have our natural drainage system. Because there's no ability for the ground to naturally absorb the water, it gets flushed into our septic areas or into our drainage areas, which can be easily overcome. So again, during these heavy rainstorms, the storm drains become overwhelmed and they flood roads and buildings. Also, areas near rivers are prone to flash flooding because rivers obviously is water accumulating at low points. And so as more water accumulates for whatever reason, it will accumulate at these low points, which are generally the rivers and streams. Dam failures can cause a sudden destructive wall of water to flow downstream. Obviously, dams are used to stop or to obstruct the flow of water from a river, and what it does is so that water is backed up at the backside of a dam. And the design is to help with agriculture and to be able to utilize land that normally would have been in a floodplain or underwater. So if you have any dam failures, that is obviously a big issue, and it creates flash flooding. Again, according to weatherology.com, mountainous terrain can be particularly vulnerable to the impact of flash floods. This is because the topography can quickly funnel water into these valley areas. And even if you don't live in mountainous terrain, valley areas tend to become what are rivers or streams or other flowing water areas. But in mountainous terrain, it's particularly dangerous because it's an extreme version of that natural accumulation of water in low points, which would just be streams and regular topography. But in mountainous areas, it's much more extreme. Ironically, or maybe not so much ironically, but what you wouldn't consider is that desert areas, particularly in the western United States and semi-arid areas like Nevada or Arizona, routinely are susceptible to flash flooding because the landscape becomes so dry and brittle. It's desert land out there, and so after the years of no water and sunlight and the actual ground becoming caked and hardened, it becomes impermeable to water. And so that whole issue would translate into rapid runoff that collects in dry river basins at the bottom of these mountainous areas and dry areas, and they're called arroyos. And that is just a term for dry river basin or dry creek or water stream areas. The result, of course, if they have flash flooding or any kind of massive amount of water or rainfall, the result is that you're going to get raging rivers in spots that were safe only seconds before, because the ground in arid areas and desert areas doesn't absorb water as well as land that has natural vegetation growing on top of it. So let's talk about how dangerous flash flooding is. We've already discussed how flash flooding happens, what it is, and so you can already get an idea of how dangerous this flash flooding is. And of course, us here living in this area, being prone to flash flooding, we understand some of the risks associated, some of the dangers associated with flash flooding, but let's cover it a little further. It's pretty easy to underestimate the power of moving water, as most people often do. Moving water doesn't appear to be too dangerous, somewhat innocuous, but the force is often much greater than one would think. According to weatherology.com, this underestimation of the power of flowing water is the cause of most flood-related deaths. It takes only 6 inches of moving water to actually throw a person off of their feet and carry them away. When you're dealing with 1 foot of flash flood water, it's been known to take a vehicle and pull it out of control, move it out of control. Obviously, and ultimately that vehicle would be swept away by the floodwaters. I'm sure everyone here has seen videos, YouTube videos of some of the areas in South and Central America that are prone to flash flooding, and you've seen a vehicle within 6, 8, 12 inches of water actually try to traverse the water. The flash flooding will push or pull that vehicle out of control, and it'll just become debris flowing in that water stream. All too often, drivers underestimate the power of moving water, and they try to cross a roadway. I'll cover some ways to mitigate the risk of flash flooding, but one of the things I'll cover is that at no point, whenever you see water flowing, any kind of flash flooding occurring, even if it's 6, 8, 10 inches, you never want to drive your vehicle over the roadway, because this generally leads to more than half of the flash flood-related deaths in the U.S. each year occur to people while they're in their vehicles. So it's because of that exact reason. Okay, so what can we do here as people living in an area that is prone to flash flooding? How can we mitigate the risk of flash flooding as citizens? Again, according to weatherology.com, I'm referencing them a lot. The key to staying safe during any weather situation, whether it's hurricanes, tornadoes, or flash flooding, as it is in this case, is to be prepared. Have a plan of where to go if flash flooding develops. Of course, here, since we are prone to flash flooding, we understand the risks, and so we should be prepared more so than others in areas who aren't prone to flash flooding when they occur. So you need to have a plan If you live near a river or a creek, you're at a higher risk for flash flooding, so you understand that. We here in this area are already prone, so we understand the risks. Know the quickest route to higher ground. That's very important. In the event of a flash flood, you want to go to higher grounds. While evacuating, remember that it's never a good idea, as we mentioned before, to drive through floodwaters. Anybody in the local area who are camping, you always want to find an area that is away from river and streams, and that might seem counterintuitive to those who like to camp. We generally like to camp near bodies of water, but if it's in an area that's prone to flash flooding, you want to try to stay away from them because those are going to be obviously the first places to flood. You want to find campsites, if you are camping, that are on higher ground, so you don't have to worry about getting caught off guard, say during the night while you're sleeping and you're not actually watching the landscape or any of the weather patterns. You also want to stay informed of potential flooding. You want to stay updated with the latest forecasts. You want to keep a weather radio if you have one nearby, so you can monitor the National Weather Service, because they do issue flash flood watches and warnings regularly when they're occurring. And they'll also, if the conditions are right for flash flooding, they'll let you know. Speaking of warnings and watches, a flash flood warning is issued when flooding is already occurring. The National Weather Service will issue a flash flooding watch when conditions are right for flooding to occur in your area during a specific amount of time. So if you're under a watch, you want to be prepared for the heightened risk. If you're under a warning, you move to a safe place. I also wanted to highlight a FEMA publication that I have online that is available to everyone online, and it's called How to Prepare for a Flood, and it gives some of the basics, how to prepare pre-flood, during a flood, and after a flood. What I did want to mention was some of the risk across the United States of America, some areas that are more prone to flooding, flash flooding, and they offer a map, a geographic display, an image where they show the country, by the entire country, and they specify regions that are prone to flooding, flood frequency by counties, from between 1996 and 2013. And the areas that are the most prone to flooding, according to the map, are in Nevada and Arizona and Southern California. Anybody who watches the news knows that Southern California right now is currently in a condition of drought. However, even during their drought condition, they are still one of the most highly prone to flash flooding in all of America. Some of the Midlands, some of the Midwest, and most of the Northeast United States, New England, they are also prone to flash flooding. And obviously us here in this area for which I'm giving this presentation, we too are prone to flash flooding. Again, protecting yourself. Know the risks. You got to know to evacuate. You got to understand to elevate and try to be waterproof, clear debris during flash flooding. And for those of us homeowners, we want to make sure we have flood insurance to help to mitigate the financial risk associated with flash flooding and flooding in general. So before a flood, you want to know the flood risk. We know here that we are prone to flash flooding. You want to know how to stay informed using radios and monitoring media in general. Know your evacuation routes. That's important. Also important is practicing how to communicate to family members and those outside of our community before a flood occurs, so that during a flood we are prepared. Practice first aid skills and emergency response action through training classes. There are plenty of CERT programs throughout the United States and here locally for citizens to prepare themselves for disasters pre-disaster. You want to store supplies. Obviously, you should have at least a few days worth of supplies at your house all of the time. Protect your property, manage risk. That's important. And there's a ton of information on this FEMA publication. Again, it's called How to Prepare for a Flood. It was written by America's Preparathon, which was a program done through FEMA to help offer publications online for those who are at any kind of risk. In this case, of course, it's for flood risk like us who are in this area. So us as a municipality, we are in the business of protecting our citizens and offering them services. So how are we as a municipality mitigating the risk to you as the citizen? Well, we have found, and most communities nationwide agree, that the key to mitigating risk within the community is through sustainable development. What is sustainable development? Well, sustainable development, according to Gamester and Munn, and I have a few references which you can see here at the end of my presentation, so I'll refer to them without actually referring to the reference source. You can go ahead and look at my references afterwards. But Gamester and Munn, they produced a paper highlighting sustainable development, and they define sustainable development, or they reference the United Nations definition of sustainable development, and it's the development which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So one of the ways that we are trying to sustainably develop here in our municipality is through the use of what is generally called absorbent concrete. This is one method that we are going to sustainably develop here in our municipality. So concrete, if you didn't already know this, is consumed in huge quantities throughout the world, and it's used to shape and build our environment. Ironically, only water is, considering we're discussing flash flooding, only water is consumed more in all of the developed world than concrete. Concrete obviously is a very important resource. It's how we build our neighborhoods. And concrete is also part of the problem, as we've discussed earlier. Concrete is the reason why in developed areas we experience flash flooding, because it displaces natural vegetation and ground, and so it contributes to water accumulating, not being able to be absorbed, flowing into our drainage areas and our drainage system, quickly overwhelming them, and then we have flash flooding. So concrete, let's discuss concrete a little bit. It plays an important role in the management of storm water, which is what we just discussed. So storm water is one of the ways that flash flooding occurs. And so again, this is the paper. It's titled "The Role of Concrete in Sustainable Development" by Gamester and Munn. So they go on to explain that concrete urban drainage systems are a benign, low-impact design that protects and incorporates natural site features into erosion and sediment control and stormwater management plans. So these systems mimic natural draining regimes, but do not require regular maintenance to ensure optimum performance. So sure, they do mimic natural drainage regimes if done appropriately. However, in most cases, the concrete, when a developed area is all concrete, as most urban areas are, it actually affects the way water can be absorbed and water is moved, generally exacerbating flash flooding. So how do we solve this? As part of our strategy for sustainable development is we are going to be using permeable concrete. So what is permeable concrete? It is, as it sounds, it is concrete that more readily absorbs water and doesn't just flush it over it. It actually will absorb and hold some water. Permeable concrete pavers are one such example of permeable concrete, and it can play an important supporting role via their ability to allow rainwater drainage through the rainwater drainage through the paved surface into the ground before being released into the sewers and water courses. They can be used for driveways, for roadways, for paths, for general landscaping, and other hard surface requirements. So using this type of permeable concrete is a way in which we, as a municipality, are trying to sustainably develop and reduce our risk of flash flooding. And finally, I'm going to cite a report written by several authors whose names I have a hard time pronouncing. So you can just look at my reference page at the end of this presentation. But it's an article that was printed in the International Journal of Concrete Structures and Material in 2012. And it discusses, it gives a much more detailed and much more technical definition of this permeable concrete. And in the abstract of this article, they discuss pervious concrete. It is a tailored property concrete with high water permeability, which allow the passage of water to flow through easily through the existing interconnected large pore structure. There's tons of data and graphics in this article. So if you're interested in some of the technicalities of pervious and permeable concrete, you can go ahead and look at my resources, and you can read it yourself. But generally, what it covers is the fineness and the granulation of the actual concrete mixture. It talks about the strength of that concrete and the permeability. What I'll do is I'll jump right to the conclusions, because the rest of it is graphs and very technical information that's hard to absorb. But the conclusions they found, based on the experimental investigation of the previous recycled aggregate concrete with high fineness ground granulated blast furnace slag, the following conclusions can be made. So that long explanation was essentially permeable concrete. So they found that the compressive strength of the material, given the same shape and size, there was a marginal influence on the strength of pervious concrete for a given porosity. So they're saying the strength didn't vary that much. The reduction in the aggregate size decreased the porosity of pervious concrete, and as the consequence, the strength of pervious concrete is increased. It's actually saying that the concrete that was permeable showed a little bit of an increase in strength of the concrete. So we're not losing the wanted quality of concrete, which is that it's strong, and we're gaining the benefit of it being permeable, aiding sustainable development and reducing our risk in flash flooding. And then it gives an actual mathematical equation about the relationship between the compressive strength of concrete, its porosity, and the relationship. They actually have it defined as PC equals 1.93 e to the 0.0755 p, and those variables are permeability and porosity. Too technical for this presentation. What I want to get across, however, is that steps are being taken and mitigation efforts are being undertaken to help reduce our risk for flash flooding. And some of the skills and some of the techniques that we've given you to help reduce your risk as a citizen, coupled with the knowledge that we are trying to reduce and mitigate your risk as the organization in charge of this municipality, the government agency. We just want you to know that efforts are being taken to protect us and protect you guys. And that is my presentation. So thank you guys for listening. Look over my references, because I did no justice to that last article that I found about the technicalities of porous concrete. But just know that it is a new technology. It is being used, and it is going to be part of the future of sustained development in urban areas. Thanks, guys.